I need to know who's speaking. Okay. Well, Green's case is better than most of what you're given, he said with some enthusiasm. At least it's not more of that adultery bunk. Sure, I replied. But I started with a goal in mind. What's the point in helping a man like Green? Frankie clicked his tongue on his teeth. Lawyer or priest? Why does it matter? Let me ask you, are the clients you have now the types you want to help? I admitted they weren't. I told him that I'd wanted more from my detecting life. Could be that Green's case shoots your career forward, Malone. I sighed and stared down at my drink. But my daze was interrupted by the basement door opening, then slamming shut. A small, blustering woman began marching towards... Oh, dear. Began marching towards me. You look a bit like Kenzie. She was wearing a light blue cloche hat with a grey ribbon tilted back on her head. A scarf of similar blue draped around her neck, but I was startled by what she wore under it. A grey trench coat that looked... I think trench coat is one word. That looked too large for her frame. Frame? It was exactly like the one that had belonged to... Lewis. She hurled insults at me a while. All I could do was sit and take it, until she ran out of gas and started breathing heavily. I set my drink on the bar and looked her in the eyes. I inserted a, "Hello, I'm Phyllis Malone. How can I help you?" accompanied by a smile as genuine as I could muster. That knocked her off balance. She stumbled over her next few words, and I added, "And you are?" The flame returned to her eyes. Between clenched teeth she hissed, "I'm the wife of that bum who sneaks into your bed." I asked, "The cat?" We're going to be sarcastic. But humour wasn't her angle. And she launched into another poetic stanza. "And he just left your sty this morning," she finally ended. And that was when I gathered she was Connor Green's wife. "Mrs. Green, I'm P.I., not a homewrecker. And I don't think your husband in his line of business would want to bet a dick anyhow." Her look was purely incredulity. "A woman in that line of work?" she questioned. "I don't believe it." "Prove it. We shall prove things with, the stack of paper. Taking the copies of old the notebook. Newspaper. No. There's nothing I can do in Southern Coffee, so it's got to be something from home. Oh, my own contributions were minimal. Maybe. It's not the notebook. Let's try this. I'd taken copies of old murder cases from the FTP that I'd been involved in. "Mrs. Green, at home I have a giant stack of cases, each one from a separate crime, covering many of the cities across the country. Went into great detail on a few of the logs, especially some of the more famous capers. I study them because that's my job." It still took more coaxing for her to believe me, but eventually she came around. She seemed grateful I'd explained it to her. Apparently, she'd seen her husband leave my apartment, and, distraught, she had followed me all the way to Frankie's basement and decided to confront me. "I suppose I lost my head after what I thought I'd seen," she said, and she began to cry. Ah. Frankie, ever chivalrous to a dimpled girl, came around the bar and held her up. "Now that's all right, Mrs. Green. Why don't I hail you a cab and send you on back home?" She agreed, and they walked together up the stairs. When Frankie returned, I said to him, "You turn night real quick." He snorted a laugh. "We can't have that siren in here. With a torch yelling like that, every street would have come to a rescue." "Mrs. Green is a torch singer?" "Well, I learned she was Mrs. Connor Green just now when she came in here. I've only seen her as Lil Fanny, singing lead for the jazz band at the Tin Spoon." "The Tin Spoon?" I said. "Tiny Paul's joint? That's where Green's selling his liquor." "Say, you think that's where she met her husband?" I laughed. "You're the real sleuth, Frankie." He made a sarcastic bow. I shook my head. "You're telling me you escorted our little torture out just to avoid a bit of hot water?" Frankie flushed and said, "What are you talking about, Malone?" I was never good with emotions, but it was plain that Frankie had instantly fallen for the girl. "So what if I had more to squeeze out of her?" I asked. "What more could you possibly want from Lil Fanny? She can't have anything to do with Green's mess." "Sure she can." It's a letter. That's the only thing we've got that I think fits, so we'll try using the letter, which he got at home. How does that prove she knows anything? Frankie asked. He was right. It didn't. I don't see how Mrs. Green's related to any of this, he concluded. Ooh, it might be that I can't contradict things. No, so I'm not going to be able to... Ooh, hello. Yes, why was she following her husband? Mrs. Green followed her husband to my place. Why would she do that? PC, if you were Green's wife, would you trust him with anything? I'm sure he's always up to something. I shrugged and stood up from the bar stool. What had just happened was quite the ruckus. It seemed like my cue to move on. Once I'd asked Frankie to lend me some cash from the register. He growled so fierce I decided not to ask again. I don't think his employers would notice before I got back, but maybe he just wanted to save me from myself. The worn stairs led to the outside world. I was heading up the stairs when Frankie called after me. So what are you going to do? I'd been thinking about Lil Fanny. I supposed even mobsters had people who cared about them, and she'd been wearing Lewis's old jacket, so perhaps Green and Lewis had been closer than I'd realized. I guess I'll take Connor Green's bait, I replied. I've got nothing better on the stove, and he might need the help. Something still stinks, though. Well, what's your plan? Frankie asked. The way I see it, I have 3 goals right now, and that's picking one American accent for you to have. Green hired me for a job. Find the guy who wrote the letter? That's the basic part. But you want more? Asked Frankie. I nodded. Green's a shady character. I have to learn about him. Who is this guy? Dig into his past. I can't go back to him blind. And then there's something about this bootlegging. How'd Green get a connection like that? What's his source exactly? Squeezing that lemon might give me more juice. That sounds alright, he replied. So where is it? I'm giving up. Let's not do accents. That sounds alright, he replied. So where is it you're off to? I've got 3 leads. That bootlegger stable, who Green claims sent him the letter. The Tin Spoon Lounge, where I might learn more about Green's rum-running schemes. And Mrs. Green, who gives me more dirt on her husband. Frankie nodded his approval. Well, if you're ever stuck, come back and see me. You never solve anything without talking it over. I smiled and went up the stairs, so I assume he's a hint thing. I assume. So let's try the Tin Spoon Lounge before we start thinking about other things. The Tin Spoon Lounge was a speakeasy in North Beach run by Tiny Paul, the gangster that Green had put in with. I'd never been there. The mob keeps a tight lip on their own houses, but I figured it would be a good place to chase Green's bootlegging story. I gave my address and slouched in the back seat of a taxicab. I thought a good way to pass the journey might be to chat with the driver. Let's see if we get anything out of him. The driver started talking about the latest films. Have you seen the 10 Commandments? He asked excitedly. I admitted that I hadn't. There's this scene, okay, where Moses parts the sea and the Israelites walk through the part. I mean, they walk across completely, you hear? I don't mean in the story, but in the film itself. Just a group of actors in between mountains of water. It looks real. I melted in my seat. How did they do it? And it has these colors, right? He continued. They're so vivid. The whole screen is blue when it's dark, or orange when it's hopeful. I haven't seen anything like it. But it's strange, less than half the film is about Moses. I mean, you call a thing the 10 Commandments, you expect it to be the old story. And it is, but then there's this long stretch about these brothers, John and Danny. And this Johnny guy's greedy and Danny's nice, and of course, in the end, Johnny gets what's coming to him. Weird way to tell the story, though. Anyhow, he ended, we're here, but you should really see this flick. Considering how much he just told me about it, I felt I didn't need to anymore. I opened the cab door in front of a North Beach warehouse with a wooden sign. The sign's text was too worn for me to decipher any of its English, but a small grey spoon was still visible below the letters. I rapped my knuckles twice over the large metal door. A panel just above my head slid sideways to reveal a pair of eyes. The eyes looked me up and down, then just stared ahead. They were black and held no emotion. The room behind was dimly lit, so I couldn't see much of their surrounding face. I cleared my throat, then a rumbling voice emerged from behind the door. Fill full your cups, feel no distress, at all our great thoughts, shrinking less. I looked at the eyes, still unmoving. I understood that Doorman wanted a password. I thought I might have something in my notes that could help. I don't think so. Password. Oh, right. User's password. No, I don't think I have the password. I'd need the correct password to get in there. No, I don't have a password. I will stay silent. Stayed silent after a beat, the small window stood shut with a thud. Prohibition was a joke in San Francisco, and most speakeasies would let just about anyone through the door, but the mob ones weren't as relaxed with their rules. I knew I wouldn't enter until I'd said the correct response. I wondered who I could ask about a speakeasy password. Well, the obvious thing there is to go to Green's house. I want to kind of leave Stable's barbershop until last. I want to kind of deal with stuff to do with Green first, because that might give me some idea as to what to expect there. Not sure. Green's house. Green's house might contain more clues about his past, or some reason a threatening letter would come his way. And if I got lucky, Mrs. Green would be there to pump with more questions. Go here. I stepped into the taxi and I thought, standing, let's talk. I love this job, he told me as we turned the corner of Polk and Bush Streets. Used to work in a plant across the bay with my two brothers. You know how boring that gets? Bang this, push that, what a life. We weren't made for factories. Sure, they get paid more, they're part of a union, they have good pensions, but they can't beat this, he said, revving his engine. Such freedom! We spoke about his love of the open road until we reached my destination. The Greens' apartment was a section of an old Western Addition mansion. The owners had divided it for struggling families to rent after the 1906 fire. Once downtown had been rebuilt, people of means moved out of the area. Recent immigrants, mainly from Japan, rented most of the apartments in this part of town. I knocked on the front door but didn't get a response. The latch was undone, so I pushed it open and stepped into the room. The apartment had a dense cloud of black smoke hanging from the ceiling. Apparently that window wasn't open much, and either Mr. or Mrs. Green smoked heavily. The grey trench coat was hanging in the doorway. It certainly looked identical to Lewis's. I searched the pockets and found no identifying marks. It might have been a different jacket, but its recent appearance was off-putting. The bottles on top of the round table were mostly empty. Ooh. I opened the drawer of the backmost table, and it were two train tickets. I mumbled, St. Louis, to myself. But then came the cackling voice of Mrs. Green. Forgot about moving, Connor. I won't budge. Her head was raised, but her eyelids still remained closed. Ask her. I asked her further questions, but her head just lolled back to where it had been. There was nothing else she'd say. Okay, so that's probably the laudanum that was mentioned. Empty bottles were strewn around the apartment. I brought one to my nose and smelled the distinct aroma of laudanum. Opium mixed with booze. A harsh tonic. A wilting plant was on the furthest table from the door. I could never keep plants alive either. Even as the petals fell, they were still a vibrant yellow. I found Mrs. Green slumped in her chair, eyes closed, head rocking slowly. Hello, Mrs. Green, I said loudly. She let out a long moan from the chair, then lifted her head, but failed to raise her eyelids. She fiddled her head to the side, giggled, then let it loll back into place. Try and talk. I shook her lightly, and she moaned again, but said nothing more. Okay. Hello. The ashtray on top of the smallest table was overflowing with spent cigarettes. Okay. Right. So, it looks like there's nothing else here. We're going to have to go to stable. I thought I might have been able to get the clue there. I could find any more evidence. I doubted Mrs. Green would be much of a talker for most of the day, though. So I think we have kind of explored everything in here. I'd kind of like to see what that... It looks like blood splatter. Though it might just be coloured. Just for a thing. Frank was just walked enough to prevent the front door from closing completely. Well, the stable's barbershop is the only thing we've got left. Green had suspected Redstone Stable of sending him that letter. Apparently Stable owned a barbershop in the financial district. I figured there would be no harm in asking Stable about it directly. Go ahead. Gave the address and talked to the driver. I asked him how he liked driving a taxi cab. It's alright, he said. Pays the bills, I suppose. These things have two wheels too many. You like motorcycles better, I asked. He smiled. You never ridden one, huh? You wouldn't ask if you had. I know poet. Can't tell you why it's such a riot, but it's a tonic to the rest of life, sister. He described the smell of the open air, the forest roads and the sandy beaches on the road from Oakland to Santa Cruz. Got a cheap Model H right now, but I need one of them R-32s, made by a German group who used to make airplanes. Those babies are so fast they might as well fly. His eyes still held a twinkle as I left the taxicab at my destination. The barbershop was down an alley in the financial district, opposite the red-bricked National Bank. The small bell above the door twinkled as I walked in. The stable's cabinet was similar to my own, but where mine was dull grey metal, his was a deep red wood that looked heavy. The modern hydraulic barber chair had always seemed ostentatious to me. This one, with its soft brown cushions and gold embroidery, was the most ornate and ostentatious I had ever seen. The maroon leather chair looked comfortable. It seemed elaborate for a barbershop waiting chair. The hat rack was a deep mahogany, engraved with gold letterings that read, Fraser & Co. Furnishings. The two sides of the mirror's frame were cylindrical, painted blue, red, and white to look like barber's poles. They clashed with the otherwise elegant furnishings. I didn't realise there's not blue in a barbershop pole, it's red and white, surely. There was a tall man in the centre of the room. He was wearing a flamboyant pink suit, tailored to accentuate his stature, with a maroon bow tie and pocket square. I gathered that this was Redstone Stable. The man turned to face me. He grinned, and his squinting blue eyes made the smile feel genuine. I must apologise, he said. We do not take walk-ins. I studied his face. The wrinkles around his eyes indicated he was at least 40, but the rest of his skin was clean and smooth. He wore no hat and shaved his head completely bald. When combined with his smooth skin, it hinted at the look of a small turtle. His pink suit and maroon accessories only added to his eccentricity. He smiled and said, How foolish of me. Of course, you're here for information, Miss Malone. I asked how he'd known my name. He hissed a few times and said, That is a dull retort. You know you're not a standard detective. Please do not act as mundane as all the other sleuths. He sighed, but put a smile back into his face. Yet perhaps you're here on a matter of interest. What is it you want? Ask about my notes. Green's letter. The day before he came to me... ask about the note. I pulled Green's note from my pocket and showed to him, but didn't let him hold it. Green tells me this letter's from you, I told him. He doesn't like the threats. Sable lowered his head to study the note, then chuckled. His knowing grin returned to his face. But this is a black hand letter, he said, flourishing a hand towards the paper. Have you ever seen a black hand letter, Miss Malone? I confessed that I hadn't. Exactly, he said. You should ring your friend Shipman at the station and ask what it means. Sam Shipman had been one of my uncle's regular partners in the vice rackets. I wondered what Shipman could have to do with Green's case. Stable seemed to think that he had a lot to do with it. I pocketed the letter and continued with my questions, but I made a note to stop by police headquarters and see Shipman. Well, Miss Malone, he smiled. Will there be anything else? Anything in statements? Let's ask about the password. I don't think he'll know it, because they seem like they might be enemies. But I showed him something in my notes, but I got no good information from our exchange. Okay. I don't think there's anything else to really ask about, though. Let's ask about the mirror, because they don't seem to fit. I looked at the cylinders on either side of the mirror. That mirror's a sore thumb. You seem above that sort of camp stable. Perhaps. Sometimes I enjoy a reminder of the history in this establishment. What history is that? This store was formerly owned by my grandfather. He started with humble beginnings. My dad taught me the meaning of hard work and dedication. I'm humbled by reminders of them. Well, Miss Malone, will there be anything else? I don't think there's anything else. I'll ask you about the waiting chair. Seems elaborate for a barbershop. I nod to a furniture. Elegant trappings for a barber. Maths was never my strong subject, but I can't see a barber making enough for all of this. He smiled. Yes, I have other methods of procuring wealth, but I do not engage in illicit activities, if that is your implication. Well, Miss Malone, yeah, let's ask about that. Statements. Okay, where do you get the money from? I nodded again to the elegant furniture, but Stable wasn't ready to admit where its wealth had come from. Okay. No, I think we've got enough there. Nothing now, I said, and turned back to the barbershop.